The Road Rash series has been reviewed the most on this channel thus far, with my personal favourite being the PS1 self-titled release on the PS1. I completely forgot that I owned the Game Boy port of the Mega Drive original though, only recently rediscovering it while moving my collection. This was released in 1991 by Ocean and EA, and involves bike racing with the added pleasure of being able to pummel your competition with a steel pipe. But, you know, only if you're into that sort of thing, of course. I think the reason I forgot about the Game Boy port is that because I originally thought it was broken. It works on neither my Game Boy Color or my Game Boy Advance SP, which both traditionally accept all original Game Boy games, and doesn't make it past the main menu. The reason for this, I later found out, is that it's because it's one of the few officially licensed games by Nintendo that does not work beyond the original DMG Game Boy and Pocket variants. Why this is the case? I don't know. Maybe EA were just having a bad day. But luckily for me, since I don't own the original DMG or Pocket, it also works on the Super Game Boy for the SNES. This is likely because it is essentially a DMG anyway, just without the screen, and is doubly fortunate since I needed it to record game footage anyway. So with all that aside, can a game with such a cool scrolling effect be ported to such a low-powered device such as the Game Boy? I'm going to add an epilepsy warning here. I'm not sure if it's actually necessary, but better to be on the safe side. The reason for this is because this version of Road Rash suffers from an unfortunate degree of flicker. So much so in fact that I thought the game was still malfunctioning on the Super Game Boy. There is even flicker when you pause. It wasn't until I looked up other game footage that I realised my cartridge wasn't faulty. The racing structure of the levels don't differ from the console counterparts. There are 5 levels of 5 races, each all based in California. You're required to place at least 4th in each race to progress, and the higher you place, the more money you'll earn. Pretty standard stuff so far for a racer, but this all changes by the fact of the combat. Sure, you can play nice and race like the gentlemanly sportsman you are, but kicking and punching the opponents is recommended if you want to stay competitive. The money you earn can be spent one of 3 ways. Firstly, if you do get beaten or crash into something too many times, then you'll become wrecked and pay a repair fee. Secondly, since you're naturally not allowed to hit each other with pipes on public roads, the races attract the attention of the local law enforcement. They'll turn up periodically and arrest you if you're going slow enough to be caught or crash next to them. This leads to the second way you might have to cough up dough as they'll fine you, however a simple fine for potential vehicular violence isn't so bad I guess. The last place to spend money is the local bike shop where you can upgrade your rig. The stats of the new bikes aren't terribly hard to follow. Basically, the more they cost, the faster they'll go. Should be noted that the later bikes get harder to control however, which is compounded by the fact there is no brake button. Being that there are only 2 buttons on the Game Boy besides from the directional pad, this makes a bit of sense. However, not being able to directly brake causes issues if you're required to weave in and out of a lot of objects. Simply releasing the acceleration and waiting for the laws of physics to slow you down doesn't usually cut it. The other button is used for combat and automatically chooses for you which side to attack from, depending on where the opponents are. Simply kicking and punching the competition is a hard way to make them fall off their bike however. Each racer has a health bar that slowly depletes as you use your limbs as weapon, so the ideal way to hurt them is by finding the steel pipe. You never get to start with this weapon unfortunately, but someone else will always have one and it can be nicked by attacking them as they attack you. It's pretty fun to then beat them with their own weapon and then everyone else, but only if you're into that sort of thing of course, as making them fall off their bike will lead them to fall quite far behind. Since combat is quite a slow process without the steel pipe though, it's recommended that you skip those that don't have it until you possess it yourself. Attacking is a waste of time otherwise, you're better off focusing on gaining a higher position in the race. I commend the developers for trying to port the fast-scrolling sprite effect that the original Mega Drive versions are known for, but as you can imagine, the Game Boy struggles quite a bit, which likely leads to that extreme flicker. The usual exhilarating feeling of going up and down curvy hills at speed is still there to an extent, but at a much reduced frame rate. This results in a game being quite sluggish, which affects the handling, and since you can't brake either, it's quite easy to collide with something and crash, as you frustratingly can't move in time. And talking of things you can crash into, this game provides quite a bit on that front. There are the usual things on the side of the road like trees and light poles that are completely collidable in all their flickering glory, as well as vehicles. There are cars driving in the same direction as you, which must be overtaken, cars coming in the other direction, which must be avoided, as well as cars crossing the road, which would also prefer not to be T-boned by a maniac on a bike. There are also dead cows lying on the road, and to that I don't really know what to say. If you do fall off your bike however, then grab a cup of tea and some biscuits as you'll be in for a wait while the rider runs back to the bike. You go flying off your bike in any number of directions depending on how you crash, and running back to your bike takes as long as it needs to depending on how far away it is. Combine this with the fact that you can be further run over by bikes and cars as you're running back, can add frustration as you slowly lose your place. On a positive note though, the tracks are quite long, so it's usually not too much of a problem to catch up with everyone if you're not near the end when you crash. As before mentioned, the graphics are a valiant effort for the Game Boy, although it's what leads to the flicker and overall sluggish nature. I should add that the colours seen here don't truly represent what they'll look like on a Game Boy, they're generated by the Super Game Boy, but usually they'll be monochromatic. Looking aside from the way it slugs along, however, you'll see that the sprites are actually quite well drawn. There are some nice additional effects too, like the sky for instance. The most detailed parts though are the detailed profiles before the races as well as the end screens. These are animated in the Mega Drive version, but I think the lack of that here can be excused. I'm glad they're included. The music is not terrible, although it gets fairly high pitched at times, which can be a bit uncomfortable to listen to. I can't say it's that memorable either, nothing on the original or even what's in the PlayStation version. Of course though, if you don't want to listen to that, there is an alternative audio mode where you can instead listen to a terrible motorbike engine sample. The choice is yours. It's a Road Rash game, that's for sure, although the greatness of other titles in the series only shines through intermittently. It's kind of like an old wino having moments of clarity. Ultimately, it's just way too sluggish to be fun, and the constant flicker is hard to look at for longer than 10 minutes at a time. And even though I really do love the original Road Rash games, this version suffers from the same main problem as those on console. It gets repetitive and boring. The same 5 tracks are used over and over as you progress through the levels. The only change is the difficulty, and that usually just consists of more bends in the road and more things to crash into. They're usually really fun for the first few levels, but then become something you just want to play in short bursts instead. Since this version isn't really that fun to begin with though, it's definitely the weakest Road Rash I've played so far.